Paul Yochum, is originally from Pennsylvania. He and his wife Judy came to Pocatello in 1993 and immediately joined the church across the street. Paul lives over here in the corner. He has served on the Parish Finance Council, the Committee to Restore St. Joseph's Chapel, and has served as an usher here for 20 years. At the conclusion of those two talks, we will hear Shelley Harden, who is a local musical artist, perform on our organ, which is itself over 100 years old.
Thank you, Bobby. I think I'll start with the story. As Bill already mentioned, I came from Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and this was my 6th stop with the company. In Bethlehem, that was the home of Bethlehem Steel. My father and his 3 brothers were the first Yochums to graduate from high school. And my dad was an avid reader of local newspapers. And so he would always quiz my brother and me on what was in the paper that day. And we were never quite certain whether he worked at the steel mills with his brothers over 40 years. And we were never quite certain whether he had already read the paper and was testing us to make sure we read the paper. But as I went from West Virginia to California to New York to Philadelphia and to Pocatello, I found the value and the comfort of reading the local newspapers. And I find myself getting the Power County Press, the Idaho State Journal, the Bingham Call Chronicle, the Showman News, and when my coworker cooperates, he'll bring me the Deseret News from Salt Lake on Sunday. Anyway, the point of this is what really began as a challenge to my brother and I to avoid the wrath of my father developed into a valuable sense of comfort as we grew up. So now I find so relaxing, go down into the basement, sit on my favorite chair, turn on the light, and read the local newspapers. And I don't know, by a show of hands, does anybody subscribe to the Deseret News?
I used to deliver it.
All right, Jerry. Anybody else? Well, then you probably missed the article in the last weekend. This is from April 16th. Idaho was named the least sinful state. As a Utahn, I am devastated. And it goes in specifically that the measure, he had 7 criteria. 1 was anger and hatred, 1 was jealousy, 1 was excesses and vices, 1 was greed, 1 was lust, 1 was vanity, and the last one was laziness. And as he measured all those, Idaho beat out Utah. Now, what does that have to do with restoration of the chapel? It has a lot to do, because this was the longest stint I've ever stayed at any one location in my career. And we always sit right about there. And when your life takes a left turn, or something goes wrong, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be able to come into a church, see people you know and recognize and say hello to, but you can't remember their names. Because I am a little bit over 60. But when I lost my wife, the people that responded to me most were people sitting right here in these pews. And that's very special. You get a lot of comfort attending the church. I don't care whether it's the Episcopalian or the Methodist or St. Anthony's, whatever, they've all been around for a long time. And I'm going to just talk briefly on how close it came to having to shut this church down. So, with that, as Bonnie already mentioned, as early as 1943 to 45, in that time frame, it was noticed that the bell tower was spreading in the middle with large cracks. Now, to understand the importance of that, All the stone for this church was quarried in Fort Hall. And by a special permission, the Department of Interior gave all the stone to the church for nothing. It was free. And that was approved by the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. Imagine that. The stone that built this church was free. It was easily quarried, and it was primarily of volcanic ash from the Yellowstone volcanic explosions. And it had particulate. And one thing you had to watch is if it got overly moist and it couldn't breathe, it would turn into clay and crack. So, as Bonnie already mentioned, in the 40s, they had to start putting concrete in to reinforce the bell tower. And then as late as '89, there were bolts put in to further secure the bell tower. And then by July 8th, 1996, Frederick Walters, who's an architectural conservator and instructor of stone and masonry architecture at Oregon State University, was asked by the parish to come here and evaluate the condition of the stone. And many of you can possibly remember, behind me there was a big crack. In that corner, there was all kinds of cracks. There was visible deterioration of the stone. And part of that was due to, in the 40s, they stuccoed the back wall. And that interrupted the ability of that stone to breathe. And it hastened, when it got wet, the turning of the volcanic ash into clay. So on June 18th of 1996, together with Frederick Walters, we asked Dr. Reed Glassman, who was from the Willamette Geological Services, to come and investigate and see what he thought of this rock. We gave him a sample of the rock, and I have his full report. If there's any geologists in the room and you want to take a look at it, you can certainly do that. But I'll just read you a paragraph from his report. Again, this is 1996. The weakly cemented nature of this glassy rock and the presence of water-sensitive clays indicate poor long-term stability in situations where cyclic wetting and drying may occur. The tuff, which is the rock, is porous with both interparticle and intraparticle porosity and will absorb water within the stone if exposed to prolonged wetness. The glassy material is prone to rapid chemical degradation under wet conditions, and shrinks and swells activity will accelerate the physical disintegration of the stone. And I could read more, but the quarry was used to build 3 buildings. This one, the Oasis Bar at the end of the corner, and what was called the White House Inn in Lava Hot Springs that later became the community building. And that suffered a fire, and luckily, in a strange sort of way, it had to be demolished. And the stone was donated back to the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. Now what that permitted was an extensive analysis of the stone. And that was done in 2004. Now I had joined the Finance Council of the church in 2002. And when we sold St. Joseph's School, and that was in June 15, 2005, the Finance Council argued that the school was sold for $258,300, and we argued that $58,000 of that should be used to help repair this church. And on June 21st, 2005, it was approved by the parish council. So we had to start. Now, when those two gentlemen inspected the stone from Lava Hot Springs, they found out that structural investigation of the bell tower was absolutely necessary. They were worried about the bell tower. Frederick Walters couldn't believe that those 3 bells, and I bought some pictures of them, were turned with only 4 spokes on the wheel. And 1,000 pounds, 800 pounds, and 600 pounds create quite a bit of vibration. So we actually had to stop ringing the bells. But before we did that, the parish office, the purpose of this letter, this was written on October 27, 2004. The purpose of this letter is to provide a response to your request to offer an opinion regarding the condition of St. Joseph's Church. From the photos that I took on September 17th, it appears that there has been deterioration of the native stone. Cracks have opened in several exterior areas, and some movement of the stone has occurred, causing cracking of the interior wall surfaces and some water damage. Some of the interior cracks have traveled both vertically and horizontally and extend from the ceiling to the side walls. This movement indicates that the structural of the integrity of this building may be weakened. Now that came from the parish office, the diocese sent it to the Catholic Mutual Group, and the inspection was done out of Omaha, Nebraska. And if you want to see some of the pictures they took at that time, there are cracks, particularly back there by the bell tower. And that was a very serious thing because the bishop had to decide, is there a safety issue here? So with that, we had the analysis of our stone done. And that was done, I'll get to my notes here so I don't get it piled up. We stopped ringing the bells on February 26, 2005, and we weren't able to get the inspection done until April 20th, 2005. So for almost 2 months, we couldn't ring the bells. I don't know if you remember that. But we did get Keith Jones from AHJ Engineers in Boise, who was a structural engineer. And he came in and worked with Fred Walters again and did an extensive analysis of the integrity of the stones of the church. I'm going to read just the first paragraph of his report. This letter, this is from May 3rd, 2005. This letter is in response to your request for a preliminary preservation assessment of St. Joseph's Parish Church. It is envisioned with the construction by the diocese of a new structure for general services and activities that the historic St. Joseph's would be used only for special functions and celebrations. Parish was concerned whether continued investment in the building was a reasonable and prudent course of action. Think about that for a minute. It came close. There was people looking at how could we utilize some of the artifacts and the precious things from St. Joseph's in the building of the new church. And that would have it would have stopped being used as a congregational church, of course. But it came that close. Later in that report, though, after the structural engineer particularly looked at the bell tower, the focus became the west wall. The west wall of the church is currently covered with Portland cement stucco. It is surmised that this was done to reduce moisture infiltration. This wall appears to be the most exposed to natural weather. But here's the summary. Based on a review of the building's condition, it appears to be sound and usable historic structure. It wasn't that good news. So after that, then in June, St. Joseph's School and the convent building was sold for $258,300. And we requested, the Finance Council requested, and it was approved, that $58,300 would be used to address this situation. In 2006 then, we did receive permission for the initial stone replacement of some really deteriorated stones, roof flashing by the bell tower. That wasn't in working order, and it was allowing water to cascade down the bell tower, which is the most vulnerable part of the church. That was fixed. The furnace was replaced, and new door locks were put on. By November, Father Enrique, and if you want to read an interesting article, the January 2007 and 9 articles on that chart, he called me into his office, and I went in and I saw Father Enrique and Father Justin, and I figured something's wrong. I'm in real trouble. But they reminded me that I made the plea for the $58,000, and he says, "You got it, now spend it." So in 2 weeks in the bulletin right here, in 2007, we solicited members that would like to work on a committee to discuss how to preserve and restore St. Joseph's Church. And we got wonderful participation, people who volunteered, Betsy Hale, Roger Henderson, Bonnie Mills, of course, Susan Swetman, Mike Thiering, and Jennifer Wise. That was the initial group, and we set our priorities. Our first meeting was held on January 28, 2007, and our first priority, of course, was to reinforce this west wall. Then we place damaged stones in the bell tower. We point all the mortar, and we place other walls. So the initial quote for replacing that wall came in at $90,000. So what did we do? Well, Mike Thiering's neighbor was a fellow named John Norstock, who at that time was economic development specialist for the Shoshone Band tribes. His next door neighbor. He said, "John, is there any stone left?" And yeah, there was. And by then, the FMC plan had shut down. And we had a black and white picture, a large picture from the 1890s, which was the oldest picture of the tribes. And that was in, well, it was in my office. And the tribes wanted that back badly. So I wrote to the corporate offices and got their permission to trade the picture for the rest of the stone. And it worked. we got enough stone to replace it. So when you see the stone repairs on the 3 walls here, and you wonder how could they match it so close? Well, it came from the good stones that was left over from the White House Inn, which was in the same quarry on the Fort Hall Reservation. Jennifer, where's Jennifer? Did you sign that letter to the tribes? Where's Jennifer Wise? I think you did. Anyway, whatever, it worked. Jennifer was teaching at Lillian Valley School at the time, and she was a real good ally to have at that time. So by September 12, 2007, the initial stone replacements were completed, and by, think of this, we had 2 master stonemasons here in Pocatello, Mike Castellanides and Mike Hayden. Think of the cost if we would have had to bring them in from Cleveland or Portland even. But they were right here in Pocatello, and their company was Portneuf Valley Masonry. That saved us a lot of money. Now, how did we fund it? Well, we came across the picture that you'll see right over there. It hangs in Father's dining room. It's how the church looked in 1930. And we said, let's take a look at that. And there were a lot of special people. We first started, how many people remember when we had like a little fish pond for the baptismal pond? Trickled water, and it would be so irritating that Father would have to shut off waterfall so people could hear us hollering. Well, what we did was we decided to take the church back to that. Now, Susan Swetman, and you all know Susan, she had a nice relationship with the Idaho Heritage Trust. She got us 2 Idaho Heritage Trust grants to work on the stone for $12,000, 5 and 7. Mike Thiering and his neighbor, and Mike did an awful lot of work. We made the deal to get the stone. And so what we decided to do was people, I think, contribute more readily when they can see progress was done. So what we did, Mike was also the head of the women's carpentry at the Idaho Correctional Facility. And they did wonderful work for a very reasonable price. And I can't tell you that exactly, but we started. We started with the baptismal font, went to the ambry, and we went to this railing. And I put the architectural drawings of those things there. And if you remember, before Vatican II, the railing extended all the way over. And there were 2 open gates here. And that all changed with Vatican II. And we made it so it was compatible with current Catholic principles, but still had the same basic look as it did in the 1930 picture. And we did that through Mike Thiering's work at the lady carpenters in the Idaho Correctional Facility, did all that work, all the woodwork. Then we did, let's see, we did the Nativity. Bonnie was a hero because when Bonnie asks you for a donation, it's hard to turn her down. And we collected, let me make sure I got it right. $40,338.50 between November 11th and St. Joseph's feast day, March 19, 2009. So we had the $40,338, we had the $58,000 from the initial sale, and then there were some families, 6 in total, that asked Father and the Bishop to direct their funds that were previously directed to the new church back to St. Joe's. And we were able to do pedestals, all 4, the new ones, the new altar. And there's a little funny story about the new altar. The priest, Father Enrique, and then even Father John after that, they were shorter. And if you remember, we took 3 inches off the height of that altar. And it also gave you a better view of the Last Supper. Bonnie, through Mary Castellides in Portland, right? And she came and we did all the statues. I don't know if you remember, for a while, the Virgin Mary looked a little bit like Marilyn Monroe. She had bright blue eyes. and Mary did a fantastic job restoring the statues that you see, and as beautiful as they are, and the Last Supper. And those are really treasures to our church. New ambry and baptismal font was dedicated on December 5th, 2007. The new altar was dedicated on January 23rd, 2008. The rock for the back wall was purchased from the Gerhard Borbonis quarry in Boise. It's the same rock that was used to construct the cathedral. It's a much harder rock. If you want to see how it contrasts with the original rock, just look at the front, where the sign is on the front lawn. That's that type of rock. And then you can see how it's a little darker, but it's so much stronger. And we wanted that for the west wall because that is the area that is most exposed to the wind and the rain and everything else. Mike and Mike completed the steeple stone replacements on May 30th. The communion railing was dedicated on June 12th, 2008. The handrails, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the handrails. These right here were completed in December 2008, and that gave us enough money with the second grant from the Idaho Heritage Trust to take on the back wall. And that was done in June 2009. And I have the drawing. It was done by Keeman Shropshire, the architect, right down the street, of how that was pinned into the old wall, and it had a big base in it, and that took care of the fears regarding the back wall. Then we did the corner pedestal for the Virgin Mary, and she will be, this is the year of St. Joseph's, and at the end of the year, St. Joseph's will go back to patron saint next to the altar, and Mary will go back into that corner pedestal. We painted all the bell tower and doors. We had to work a little deal with the fire department. They wanted us to put a sprinkler system in. Well, there's no running water here. And so we agreed on a knockbox and fire, smoke, and heat alarms, and you can see them up on the ceiling and everything. And that took care of that. And in total, we spent $139,761, which was really more than double that if you were going out on open market. But every contractor we used gave us a break. The $90,000 for the wall was cut to $70,000. And we were able to do all those projects for $139,761. Now, before I forget, when I normally talk, I normally try and avoid mentioning people's names because invariably I'll forget one. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'll wake up and it's darn it, I forgot to mention somebody like Karen Sloop. If you remember Karen, she had terrible arthritis in her hands. But anybody who made a donation got a handwritten thank you note from Karen Sloop. Rosa Flores, Mila Mendiva sponsored a dinner. Tom Belcher, who worked for a janitorial firm, did all the work necessary to do phase 2. And I'll tell you just a brief moment on that. We're already at 5 after 8 and I don't want to go too much longer. So that concluded it. And the building was rendered structurally capable for another 100 to 200 years by those two people. That was very important. Finally, that led to phase 2. Who knows what phase 2 was? Huh? The place, as you get older, you need bathrooms. You had no bathroom. So we approached Father John, and we had $12,000 left over from this one. So he said, what do you think? It was, if you remember, the offices used to be here. Kathy Barkdoll's office was there, and they were transferred, unified over there by St. Anthony's. But that created the opportunity to finally get bathrooms. And we did the same thing, and all of you who supported it, we collect $43,081 and 34 cents. And we were able to do the bridge between that door there to the rectory. It was very difficult. You had to be very careful to meet the diocese rules because you were exposing the public to the priest's living quarters. And so there were exact lock rules and everything. But we finally got running water and 2 working bathrooms that were available to the congregation. And all you gotta do, and by the way, they're open tonight. And we also got a nice meeting space for small group meetings, and that was in total something over $65,000. But you did it. A lot of contributions. We didn't have any debt at all, and we really prepared this church for the next long time. So thank you all. Appreciate it. By the way, I brought just some of the things from my files. There's the 25 Silver Jubilee, which talks about Father Cyril, and some of the drawings and documents, if you want to look at it. Yeah, go ahead,
Do you mind
Thomas.
just staying and mentioning what's next? Are there other improvements we want to make to the exterior or surrounding the church as part of the anniversary?
Yeah, Father called together a group. Bonnie was there and I was invited to take a look at making a walkway in the front of the church for the possibility of erecting a statue of St. Joseph's on the outside. I don't know where that stands. If Father was here, I'm sure he could give you an update. But I do know that as we near the 125th anniversary date in December, he has some plans for that to occur.
And our final section of this presentation is the culmination, because we get to hear Shelley Harden play our pipe organ, and the piece she's playing is called Elegy, and it was written by George Phelan Ball, with the British. This was written originally; it was improvised, and it was performed in 1944 for an evensong on BBC Radio. So this is during the war. So without further ado, Shelley will play this Elegy by George Phelan Ball.